Thanks a lot, Dennis. Okay, you can go ahead and open your Bibles to Ephesians, the 4th chapter. We're going to revisit this chapter. We looked at this a couple of weeks ago, and what I'm going to be talking about is going to be kind of based on some of the things that we've already looked at. In fact, even going back to Romans, the 12th chapter, we looked about a month ago at Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, that really emphasizes being transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that developed into another sermon in which we looked at the similar language. We'll see that once again, revisit that once again, that idea of being renewed in our mind here in Ephesians, the 4th chapter. And we'll specifically look at the idea of, the benefit of doing that. This all started back when we looked at this renewal there in chapter 12 of the Roman letter, in really understanding the struggles that I think religion is having in our modern society, in our culture. And part of the problem, I think, is the failure for it to really transform people. People are not really understanding what this transformation is, this mind renewal that Paul spoke of. And if we understand it and we see the beauty of this transformation, I think it will make a positive impact, not only on our lives, but it will be a testimony to the people around about us as to just part of the great benefits that we gain from being a Christian. And that's where the tie-in will come. If I can get this overhead projector on. Look like they're on. So if we can get that, looks like it's starting to warm up there. So popping up on the screen here will be the particular emphasis that we're going to look at this morning, and that is learning to control your anger. This is one of the ways that we can understand, the benefit of being a Christian. One of the ways that we can understand what's so good about the good news. Well, I know that I've had problems with anger from time to time. How about you? Is it something that you've ever struggled with? I know it's an ongoing thing that I work on. And I've come to the conclusion that it's going to kind of continue to be that way for me. It's kind of always going to be a work in progress for me. The good news, and this is, I think, is part and parcel of the message I want to communicate this morning. The good news is that God has mapped out a way that you and I can deal with our anger appropriately. And just as a way of introduction, look there in Ephesians, the 4th chapter, verses 26 and 27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let your sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Now, when we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, I pointed out to you that the language there is very interesting. It says, be angry. And so one of the things that I take from that passage is that it's not automatically wrong to be angry. It can be wrong. That's what I think verse 27 is warning us about, is that anger, if we don't learn to control it correctly, can give place to the devil. It can open up doors of temptation that lead to sin. And so that's what he says, be angry and do not sin. That's the problem with anger, is that we don't know how to control it, and it often leads to sin. And so that's what we really have to land on. And so to help us do that, learning to control our anger, we want to go back and revisit some of the things that we talked about in lessons past. And the first basic concept has to do with the renewing of our mind. So let's go back and look at the larger context here, where Paul kind of sets this up, going back to verse number 17 and reading the context there. I think helps us understand how important this actual transformation, this renewing of the mind really is, and how we can apply this as a principle to help us learn how to control our anger correctly, so it doesn't lead to sin. It doesn't give place to the devil. So let's read this here together. Ephesians 4, beginning at verse 17, down through verse 24. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. But you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you have heard him and been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man, which grows corrupt according to deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. So it's this idea of mind renewal, the renewing of our mind, and what this is really talking about. And again, we went into greater detail. I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of what we looked at in lessons past. This mind renewal basically is referring to a rejection of worldly definitions of things, how we define what's important. Like money, people make terrible decisions in their life because they're consumed with money, a materialistic desire. They're consumed perhaps by fears over money, fears about not having enough money. And those fears come from allowing the world to define for you, to set your values of how you think about money as being the most important thing. And so this is what's happening. People out there in the world are seeing Christians who claim to be Christians, and yet when they look at their attitude towards money, they don't see any difference in the attitude of this professed Christian towards money than people who aren't professing to be Christians. See, there's not any renewal occurring there. There's no transformation. Go back to Romans 12 verses 1 and 2, and that's a big part of the problem, is that people out there in the world are not seeing any value to Christianity because it's not producing a change in anybody. Well, this is what Paul's talking about. He's saying we really have to quit accepting the world's definition about things, okay? And it's not just money. I mean, we could talk about any value, anything that's of a definitional nature. I mean, how do you define success? What's success? Okay. Or power. How do you define power? In our lesson on Proverbs that we're studying in Proverbs, we'll see the writer of Proverbs define power in the ability to control the words that you let come out of your mouth. Now that's power to that guy. Has nothing to do with ruling over vast territories, controlling, being a dictator over millions or perhaps billions. Has nothing to do with it. That's not how the Bible looks at power. It's a different definition of power. Okay, who defines what you think is power? Now, the reason why all that stuff, go back to verses 17, 18, and 19, Ephesians 4. Why all that stuff is going on, why he says, don't walk like the rest of the Gentiles walk. They walk in the futility of their mind. He says they have their understanding darkened. Why all that stuff? Why is their thinking futile? Well, it's because they've accepted these worldly definitions. So that then is a contrast. Look down at verse 20. But you have not so learned Christ. That's the fulcrum of the spiritual seesaw. The fulcrum, the point that it is balanced upon, is what has Christ taught you? Christ doesn't teach you these values. Christ doesn't say that kind of thing to you, okay? He's going to give you a different set of definitions. Now, of course, for any of that to work, we have to begin to accept those different definitions. We have to start putting away these worldly ways of defining the importance of things, okay? And so that's what Paul's saying here. It's the same thing he was pointing out in Romans 12, pointing it out right here now in Ephesians, the 4th chapter. He's saying renewal is the rejection of worldly definitions and the acceptance and the substitution of Christ's definitions. See, it's a redefining of your value system. Okay. And that's where Christianity is failing. It's not the failure of Christianity, it's the failure of people to understand I need to replace my worldly thinking systems with godly thinking systems. And that will result in a transformation. That's what he was talking about in verse 12, the term be you transformed, in Romans 12 rather, be you transformed. That word transformed is from metamorphomahe, familiar sounding word, because that's where we get the biological description of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. What's that called? Caterpillar turning into a butterfly is metamorphosis. Yeah. So there you go. That's what Paul's talking about. And that's what the word of God, that's what learning Christ will do to you. It will transform you. Okay. So that's an important principle, that if we're going to get down to learning how to control our anger, we've got to understand, well, that's one of the things I need to start going through this metamorphosis. And it comes by learning Christ. Now, the second thing that we looked at is this idea of interconnectedness. If you look down at verse 25, Ephesians 4:25, therefore putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Now that's really important to understand what Paul's saying there, because that's the basis of why it's wrong to lie, you see. And so you see these principles that are emphasized in elsewhere. Look in Matthew 25. I have that in parentheses there. And Matthew 25, and at verse number 40, the king will answer and say unto them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. Now that's Jesus is telling them a little story, and you're probably familiar with that, when he says, I'm so glad you came and you visited me and you helped me. And they say, when did we visit you? When did we help you? When did we give you clothing? And he said, well, in as much as you did it to the least of these little ones of mine, you did it to who? Me. Now, you see, that's an expression. Jesus says that because he understands the concept of interconnectedness. See, the way that you treat other people is the way you're treating God. Now, you can invert that. You can also understand that the way that I treat other people is a way I'm treating, guess who else? Myself. And that's how Paul takes that principle of interconnectedness and uses that as the basis of why it's wrong to lie, because it's just like lying to yourself. Okay. And so it's based on understanding that, and that's very problematic. We tend to want to divide the world up. We think in a binary fashion only. It's us against them, right? Us versus them. And that's a very worldly way of thinking. And so it's not saying that we don't recognize that there are bad people out there in the world. It means that we look at, well, most of you are probably familiar with what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. When your enemy is hungry, what should you do? Feed them, right? See? So he says, love them, pray for them that spitefully use you, all right? Treat them with dignity and respect. Now, they can be wrong. They can be bad people. They can be evil, wicked people. Remember in what happened to this concept of I respectfully disagree with you? Remember that? What happened to that? And that's based on this idea of interconnectedness. And so I think that's really important, and that's the basis of how Jesus. So again, that's something the world doesn't get. The world wants to divide us up. It wants to divide us up based on the color of our skin. It wants to divide us up based on whatever political party I might belong to. It wants to divide us up. It just wants to divide us up. And Jesus comes along and he says, you've got to quit thinking in those binary fashions. It doesn't mean that there aren't bad people. It doesn't mean that there aren't wicked people. It means you understand they're people. They are made in whose image? God's image. And we all are. Okay. And so it's this concept of interconnectedness. Now, the point to understand then is that these two concepts, this actual idea of transformation, the rejection of worldly definitions, and secondly, this concept of interconnectedness, even the bad guys. That's why Jesus would hang around sinners. He wasn't saying what they were doing was okay, but he understood, you know what? They're people, they're human beings. I'm going to treat them with dignity and honor and respect. I'm going to love them. And secondly, it's the same idea of interconnected. We're all interconnected. That forms the basis of everything that Paul will subsequently say in Ephesians, the 4th chapter. So when we get down, it's this idea of treat and think about others with love, respect, and dignity. That's that idea of interconnectedness. So when we get down to what he goes on to say, controlling our anger, we can see these two principles reflected in that concept that Paul's talking about how we go about doing that. How then does what he says in verses 26 and 27 about, be angry, but sin not, let not the sun go down in your wrath, nor give place to the devil. How is that connected back to these two concepts? Well, let's dive in a little bit deeper. Let's look at it as a function of renewing your mind. Learning to control your anger is a function of mind renewal, okay? Look in Ephesians 4, verses 17 through 19. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. And one of the big reasons why the Gentile world, the part of the world that doesn't want to listen to God, doesn't want to listen to Jesus, is the way that they are is because they don't know how to control, guess what? Anger. Stop and think about that, see? I mean, here's some pictures, okay? Russia and the Ukraine, what's going on there? I'm thinking that's because a lot of people are really angry at one another. All right. I mean, the news is you just look around the world around about you and you see a world full of what? Anger. People who don't know how to control their anger. See, it's wacko. It's out of control. And you see manifestations of this all over the place. People are giving vent to their anger and they don't know. And it ends up, it's not automatically wrong, when there's oppression going on. I can see, when Jesus went into the temple and he saw the money changers there, what was his reaction? He got angry. All right. But you see, what they don't understand are these other qualities that are necessary in order to control that anger so it doesn't manifest itself this way. So what I'm saying is that Ephesians 4, 17 to 19 is a pretty good explanation for why we're seeing the world in the condition that it's in. It's not always due to that, but a large part of it is that they don't know how to control their anger. So that's what he's describing in verses 17 through 19, okay? And so that's what we need to do. It's getting down and learning Christ and learning these other qualities that help us deal effectively with anger. We'll talk more about that. The point here is to understand the world does not know how to properly handle anger. And for us to learn how to do that, we can't let the world tell us what we need to be angry about. Because the world typically gets angry over wrong things. And secondly, they don't know how to control it. They don't know how to handle it. It just boils over into sin. It gives place to the devil. So first of all, we have to learn Christ. Okay, we have to learn a different way of processing that anger. It's also a function of our interconnectedness. Paul will go on into chapter 5 and point this out. Let's take a look in chapter 5, Ephesians 5:28 through 30. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. See, that's the basis of interconnectedness right there. It's what the Bible calls one flesh. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body. There again, interconnectedness. That's one of the driving principles. That's why Paul's writing this. Okay. For we are members of his body, his flesh, and of his bones. So likewise, dealing with anger is a function of our understanding that we're all interconnected. And this is what Paul then goes on into chapter 5. That's how he applies the principle. He talks to husbands and wives. This is especially true in the husband-wife relationship, but it's true in all subsequent relationships. So anger, if it's improperly managed, as I say, the world tends to divide us up on racial lines, on ethnic lines, on religious lines, on political lines. This narrows our sense of connectedness. That deconnects us. I am not connected to you because my political affiliation is different than you. We're not connected anymore. Okay. That's a big part of the problem. A big argument we're having right now is that stuff going on over there in Israel right now with Hamas and Israel. Now, who's the oppressor? See, both sides are scrambling to define the other guy as what? The oppressor. No. I'm not the oppressor. I'm not a terrorist. I'm a freedom fighter. See? And that's that binary thinking once again. And it doesn't adequately describe the reality of the situation, because the reality of the situation is that you're not going to have to go very far to find out some way in which you're oppressed. Okay. Everybody's oppressed. And you're not going to go very far to find out ways in which maybe I'm the oppressor. Maybe I'm the one doing the oppressing. Okay. And so this view of dividing the world up into just these two groups of the oppressed and the oppressor doesn't fit what's actually going on in the world around you. It doesn't fit what's actually happening in the husband-wife dynamic. It creates a culture of victimization in which everybody's angry. Both the wife and the husband are angry at one another. God advises a totally different way. And seeing yourself, instead of seeing yourself as cast off, instead of seeing yourself as excluded, instead of seeing yourself as divided, what does Jesus teach us? See what? Your interconnectedness. Do the opposite of what the world is telling you to do. See others around you. Husbands, see your wife as part of who? Me. She's part, isn't that what Paul says? Quit seeing her as something distinct from you. See your interconnectedness, see? And then you extend that out to your family. That's how you see your family that way. And guess who else? You see your brothers and sisters in Christ that way. And pretty soon you start seeing everybody that way. You start finding these patterns of commonality. Stop and think about how you make friends with people. You mentioned something offhand. Oh, I was watching the San Francisco Giants the other day. You like the San Francisco Giants? Yeah, they're my favorite team. Has that ever happened to you where suddenly you find a point of what? Commonality. What does that commonality do? It binds you together. See? So that's what this is what Jesus teaches you. This is how we learn Christ. Woke ideology does the exact opposite. Woke ideology seeks to destroy commonality, seeks to destroy community. It creates enemies, all of which are very angry. Okay. And when they're angry, they give place to the devil, and those pictures that I showed you before, that's the stuff that results from that. And it doesn't just happen on a national level, it happens on the family level. It happens within church communities because we don't see our interconnectedness. So that's what we really need to do. We need to think and act in ways that create connection and community, you see. Now, there are other things that I could go on and talk about. I'll have to save those for another lesson. But this is basically what I was really trying to do, is to go in a little deeper on this, just to show you this concept and everything that Paul says in Ephesians 4 and even subsequent chapters goes on to be expressions of these two concepts, where first of all, there's actual mind renewal going on. What does that actual mind renewal mean? It means that I quit letting the world set my definitions for me. The world doesn't know what beauty is. You think Hollywood has a grasp of beauty, of true beauty? I was thinking of this morning when I was thinking about this lesson. And I just had read a little article about Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, have any of you ever seen a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt? She's not particularly physically attractive, but I'll tell you what, she was a beautiful woman. Why? Because inside of her. Okay. And so again, it's just a whole different way. And you can, anything you want to talk about, success, what's modesty? Okay. What's, all of these words that we use, what's important, what's right, what's wrong. Okay. All of these are values. And what is mind renewal about? Mind renewal is saying, I'm not going to let the world tell me my definitions of these things, because the world doesn't know. The world is crazy mixed up. And when I start doing that, it doesn't happen all at once. It's a process that you go through. As I said at the outset, I'm still working on this anger management thing. How about you? Okay. So it's still a work in progress, but it comes because I'm going through this process of really rejecting. And that's when I get angry, and then I can go back and say, what was it that really made me angry? Maybe it was a wrong value. Maybe, I just got aggravated at the person. Maybe it was an ego-driven thing, or, it could be lots of things. A lot of times it's just something that just inconveniences me. And, everybody knows I'm the most important person in the world, right? You all know that, don't you? I say that with a smile on my face, because I'm not the most important person in the world. But I catch myself sometimes acting and thinking as if I am. So these are all things of mind renewal. And then this idea of interconnectedness, when I'm yelling at someone else, I can understand that really, this person is somehow connecting me, and me yelling at them and showing this anger is really just bouncing back and doing this, especially when it's my wife. It's the Bible calls out a one flesh relationship, or my own family, or how about my brothers and sisters in Christ, or how about my next door neighbor, or how about my coworker? Pretty soon you can just start applying this to who? Everybody. And Paul is saying, good, that's what I want you to do. Now you're understanding this concept of interconnectedness. And once you start exploring that concept and exploring commonality, what do I have in common with this person? you'll find that you can begin to ratchet down your anger. And it will work. It will really, really work. Now, there's other things we can talk about subsequently. Let's draw this lesson to a conclusion. And part of it is just understanding the value and benefit of being Christian. That this really can have a positive impact on my experience in this life. And what is really important is how it prepares me for the life to come, for eternal life. It just checks all the boxes, okay, that we can possibly have. It checks the boxes of dealing effectively with life in this crazy, jumbled up, mixed up world right now. And it checks the box of taking care of where I'm going to spend my eternity, which really, that's probably, what do you think? More important than the things that happen to me here in this life. And so that's the beauty. That's why it's good news. It's good news because it checks all the boxes. It really provides you with what you need. You can respond to that. Come forward, hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. If you're in any way subject to this invitation, come forward and make those wishes known. While together we stand and sing.